Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about postmodernism and therapy. So I just wanted to see what you guys thought about it. Just as a reminder, postmodernism is the approach that questions universal truths and objective knowledge and traditional authority. So what would that look like in therapy?
No, I kind of like it because for whatever reason it kind of appeals to my spiritual side. So that's I do like that about it. And I think that a lot of things are from the individual's perspective. And you know, so how do you tie that into what society says is normal?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point with the societal piece of it because we try so often to like fit these almost like cookie cutter images of what it's supposed to be. Um, and what's nice about it is that it's not it's not so black and white. Like
Hmm.
I know for me, like I always struggled growing up in a very like it's either this or this, but like we live in there's a ton of shade of gray that isn't really acknowledged. So it's nice to like with postmodernism, especially in therapy, we're able to kind of tap into all of these other shades, um, not just for ourselves as clinicians, but like for our clients that you know that find themselves within these shades that aren't necessarily this or that.
And I also believe the benefit is, that pressure that society creates by creating categories for everyone and what's acceptable, what is not acceptable. You got to be a certain race, you got to look a certain way, um, you got to make this much money, you got to live in a big house, you got this, that, the other. Um, Really, those societal type pressures are what keep us in business. If you really, really think about
That was a good last sentence. That's so true. And yeah, as like while I was reading through this, I kind of have a tendency to like structure. I have a tendency, oh, sorry, dogs. Um, I have a tendency to like to follow a plan. And that's kind of where my research brain goes to. I think my undergrad was super, super research heavy, and to be quite honest, like very black and white, which wasn't, it was in psychology, not in marriage and family therapy. So that is the difference a little bit. But I did like that. Like I liked having that research to kind of fall back to and look at and then grow from that, which I think is kind of what I got out of the systematic practitioner inquiry. I forget who was kind of the person for that. But where they kind of combine that research evidence with practitioner experience and client values. So you're taking the evidence or the research of whatever modality and inputting that into your client's background, lived experiences. We can go on and go on and go on. And I think that's kind of helpful just so that we don't or I don't get lost in the context because I feel like sometimes in the context I'll start to like flounder. Um, and it's just a good way for my brain to revert back and go to baseline and then keep working up. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. And like I feel like this is like this very postmodern segue into like our own experiences affect so much of like how we're interacting with this material because in my undergrad, I double majored in journalism and English, which was like how do you report cold hard facts without any bias as well as you can versus an English degree, which is like let's interpret everything and like what does this mean and let's dive into like the symbolism and what does it mean to you versus what does it mean to someone who would be reading it at the time it was written, so like everything has this like maybe the intended meaning and the assigned meaning, or the assigned meaning, and like maybe reality somewhere in the middle, and I love this kind of stuff because it is so like philosophical and like what is reality? And I spent the last few decades reading as much science fiction as I did to to not love those questions. Um, but yeah, I think it's so fascinating because like I just don't understand how you could separate meaning, like separate what someone views as the meaning of their experience, versus the experience itself. Because without that personal meaning, it is or it's not going to be an issue, right? So at least that's how I look at it anyway. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, that makes sense.
Definitely.
Um, I also like the part, postmodernism is we're getting into cultural context, which has a direct impact on our lived realities and our lived experiences. It's just like when I had the conversation about racism, and I'm sure you ladies, when you have the conversation about sexism, you know, there are certain intrinsic things as a black man and you as women, if you're having this conversation with, someone that's not a woman or, me with someone that is not from my community, um, that only we can understand. And then again, that has a direct impact on our perception of things. So we're getting into, again, my reality versus your reality. And culture is such, a big part of it. I mean, you look at African American history, you look at what's going on in the country today with our history trying to be removed. Um, so I think that's one of the good things because, again, as therapists, we talk all the time about cultural competency, being empathetic, compassionate. And so I think, the culture part is very important to someone's perspective.
Absolutely. And just tying into what both you and Christine were saying, I think that the experience piece is so big, right? Like you can't, you know, you can experience the same thing, right? Like on a bigger level, like we all experienced 9/11, right? We were all alive during that time. We all experienced COVID. We were, the way that imprinted on us on a big scale societally and as a country is one thing, but even within our own families and communities, or even like, and it can be seen even within the family. I know last time we met, like I had shared about my dad, when you lose somebody, when you lose a parent, when you lose somebody, you all experience that same loss together because that person is no longer there. The person passed, like the fact on that person passing and how they passed is there. But the way each person interprets it after that and it affects them after that is so unique because based on that personal relationship. Um, or even like, it's funny, I was talking to one of my brothers and they were talking about how I was saying, I was like, we had the same parents. And he actually corrected me and he was saying, he's like, well, kind of, like we each had them though at different phases and with different levels of experience and with different, all these other variables to it. Like, yeah, they're the same people, but when I had them when they were 36 versus my brother who had them at 23, they grew up at that time. And so like there's a lot that we share that can imprint, it imprints differently. And I think you're both right in that cultural and experiential piece being so strong. So it's almost like there's no way to like move past or ignore the personal narratives or the experiences. And it can seemingly be something so like, I don't want to say small, but like something that seems so like whatever, but it's so big that we lose sight of it. I think it also ties into our like therapeutic alliances with our clients of like understanding, like even if it seems small when we're first hearing it or whatever the event is, it's clearly imprinted and impacting enough that they need to share it.
yeah, that reminds me that saying that a man can't step in the same river twice because he's not the same man and it's not the same river. And I think that a lot of this theory and this philosophy is kind of based on like recognizing that like we're never going to step in the same rivers. It's just impossible. And I really like that recognition because it does kind of take that, almost takes the pressure off of like having to completely understand someone's experience because you're never really going to, but that doesn't mean that you can't be open to it and you can't help someone kind of review their own experience, right?
Which ties
So,
into the cultural humility. Sorry,
yeah.
cut you off. Ties you into like the
Mhm.
whole idea of not just cultural humility. I'm sorry, the idea of the client is the expert in their narrative. Like we can look at patterns and we can be like, oh, that's weird. Oh, you mentioned that here with this incident. Like we can do all of that, but it's never it's like this because of this. Like one of my therapist does this thing that I love. He'll make an observation and then he'll say, he's like, how does that land on you? Am I right? Am I wrong? Like, I need you to correct me. And when he first did it, I was like, I don't know, you're the expert. Like, what do you want me to do? But in hindsight, it's like, no, but that gives you agency to be like, no, that wasn't my experience, or yes, that was.
Yeah, we just had and I love this and we've already been talking for 11 minutes. It's crazy. But like I just had this experience where I was facilitating a training and something happened with two participants behind the scenes that we weren't aware of. And one of the male participants was really inappropriate with one of the female participants. And she wasn't sure if she should say something and came forward, and eventually did say something. And we got together and we're talking about it yesterday. And one thing that we said was like, you don't know what a pattern of behavior is. You might not, like, you might just have this experience where you feel like something's off, but you don't see that it's a pattern until you can zoom farther out. And sometimes you can't zoom out yourself. So you need more eyes on the situation to help see what that pattern is. And I think that's a lot of what this type of therapy is like kind of having somebody who can get a different perspective so that you can almost get that like that you know 3D vision going because it's not just like you're looking with one eye, you're actually able to see more and kind of get the whole perspective in a way that you might not be able to on your own. And that doesn't mean that you're seeing 100% of the experience. It's just that you just have that different perspective to see that pattern, like that particular pattern.
Yeah, I love that you just talked about kind of teams and looking from the outside and also being able to, I'm assuming you were kind of talking with a team of leaders or facilitators. Okay, yeah. Um, this postmodernism really does reflect on that ability to work with other therapists and to work with other agencies in in terms of looking at your client and really not figuring out the whole story because like we kind of said you're never really going to, but at least getting more eyes on it and different perspectives. We are all human at the end of the day, and our perspective, no matter how much work we possibly try to do on ourselves, is going to be our perspective. And so that's why discussions like this or group facilitator, meetings like that are so important because people will bring things up and you're like, oh, yeah, totally. Okay, let's look at it through this lens. Now, if we dive at it here, this is what this client could be coming up for this client, right? And so I love that it's kind of taking away from that therapist on client relationship and in turn going to multiple professionals and client lens, which I think is so, so powerful.
And even going off what you're saying, even that multiple perspectives and lenses that we're looking at it through, it really ties in well with the whole social constructionism piece of it as well. Of like, it's not just these isolated individuals that happen to be facilitators on a team. Everybody is bringing their own experience. Everybody is bringing their own culture norms. Everybody is bringing their own reality that was created through the language that you're using, even in the language that you're using when, um, we talk about like reporting something versus sharing something, right? Um, it's interesting because it's like it's all so deeply interwoven that you can't talk about one without realizing that the other one is so massively at play as well. Um, yeah.
Yeah, like I always say, and I'm sure you ladies have heard me say this before, but I'm always talking about diversity of thought and diversity of perspective. Because there's so much value to those things, and especially about what we're talking about right now.
Well, I think our time is almost, or it is up. Does anyone have any last things they want to add, ideas they want to add?
I just really appreciate all of your perspectives. Like these are really fun conversations to have. So thank you for making it fun.
Yes.
I wholeheartedly agree.
And the last thing I'll say, and it's pertinent to this, is I feel very fortunate because we're all in a stage of life where we can have these types of conversations.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I love these. I honestly love these assignments. Well, thank you guys so much, and thank you for listening to our meeting.